but a platform, a state of mind, and I'm happy to participate in this inaugural session of ISCA. It's true that Africa has a lot to do, and it's true that it's also true that part of it is up to Africa. The other part is up to the rest of the world, specifically Africa's partners. And I'd like to start where I should probably end the conversation. I mean, nobody expects anybody to come and join the negotiation table all by themselves. Africa needs to take its place that it deserves, which ought to have been the case a long time ago, since a long time ago. But within exchange and speeches that we heard this morning, the opening remarks, I mean, as Africans, we need to internalize the fact that our part is the most important. It's true, the world has shared challenges that require solutions in which Africa must participate. Even beyond security, climate change, for issues for the future. So there's no doubt about that. And for many reasons, including some that's been mentioned by previous panelists before lunch, there's work to do on Africa's side, same for everyone else, the rest of the world. But I represent an organization whose actually the majority of the member states of my organization are African states. So half of the decision makers of the Francophonie are African countries. So I have the opportunity to be informed of different proceedings. I came here after a conference with the foreign ministers and who've been looking at Africa's issues. So we need Africa, and every century that begins, it's said to be Africa's century, a continent that has many assets, opportunities, and actually, in spite of that, what we see is that we don't move forward as fast as the world moves forward. And the Chinese participant, Mr. Gao, spoke about the dichotomy, United States, China, and the question which is recurrent, put to African leaders, which is if Africa cooperates with China or the United States. I don't see anybody asking the same question to European leaders. So why does Africa has to align with one or another country, no matter how powerful they are, and not rather find its own way with, why not, various partners? So Africa is actually a continent, not a country. It's a continent which is very diverse. Cultural diversity, geographical diversity, political, economic. But overall, it's a powerful bloc. It's a group of countries that has a lot to bring to the table to those countries and the rest of the world. So the debate today in this context of analysis of security issues, we need to take that into account. I thank ISCA for having put security at the center of this conference, this discussion, beyond defense and military security or police issues. So here in Africa today, we must stop just making observations. And today, in this inaugural session, it's important to understand how to move forward on every subject where we've been lagging behind. Issues we've been discussing for a long time, and we've said it earlier. And if I were to answer directly to the question, Africa must, as a whole, identify and move forward based on her own interests. So the question is, where is Africa's interest? Exactly, and how to define them. So it's not enough to have another seat. You need to take that seat and use it. So how do we articulate a common African stand based on her interests? And because that's the only thing that's important, most important thing. So there's been progress. It's true. The first climate summit in Kenya in 2023, and recently, a few days ago, there was a summit on debt organized by the African Union. So how do we ensure that those common positions by Africa, once they are articulated, they make it to the international level and efficiently in one voice, and not give an impression that once you participate in a COP, maybe the Seville Summit on global financing, and then you see a variety of African positions, and then you lose sight of a common position. So how do we do that? Because if I remember, during the discussions about Africa's representation and a fully fledged membership at the Security Council, well, we keep hearing that. Why do we give just one seat to a continent with 54 states who don't agree with each other on all these things? So two aspects that are, for me, are as important. The African positions are sometimes very well articulated, but they don't reach their destination, and they are not owned by the continent as a whole. The first aspect that we've said already, it's the lack of unity. Well, we've called it solidarity. Well, you may as well say that it's about having a shared vision by the 54 countries. It's not obvious, it's not easy, but where we've been able to articulate Africa's interests as 54, that's the first step. But we're not always a unified body. And that's the first barrier. And the second, for example, Africa's position adopted in Nairobi, but that was not the same when we saw what happened in Dubai. We don't have the methodology or organization. We don't know sometimes. We don't know how to go all the way to the end of things. So it's unfortunate that, well, I have many examples in mind. Each time the continent was unified around one subject, identified her interests, and brought its position on the global stage, Africa won My brother Moussa Faki mentioned this when Africa supported Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus for the Director General of World Health Organization. There was no objection on the continent. It was unanimous. It was a clearly identified interest by Africa to have that organization be led by an African. After the Ebola epidemic that struck many countries in Africa. So we said we need an African heading World Health Organization. That was the first part. The whole of Africa was united behind an African qualified candidate who was going to fight for the interest of the continent at the World Health Organization. That's the first part. Second is that we needed to be organized. I was reminding Moussa Faki that several months before the real campaign for the position, the World Health Organization, the president of the African Union, that was Madame Nkosazana Zuma, Moussa Faki and myself, we went to Geneva. I was part of Tedros's campaign for the East African countries. So we went to Geneva. We brought everyone together. We spoke to African ambassadors. We defended that candidacy all the way to victory. So it was an identified interest. It was the continent's interest. We were, towards the end of the campaign, there were difficulties, but none of the ambassadors objected to that candidacy. So Africa was united all the way. Which led, and since 2015, Tedros Adhanom is the Director General of WHO, an African supported by all Africans. And there was a method to do that. Same thing during the Ebola epidemic, when West African countries like Liberia, Guinea, and others asked other countries, African countries, to give them medical personnel. And back then, Madame Zuma, who herself once was Minister of Health, asked different ministers, and we mobilized our countries, and we were able to send medical personnel to those West African countries who worked there as volunteers. And even then, it was the interest of the continent to support other African countries facing that crisis. After the COVID, we've seen other moments of unity on the continent, with methods that allowed us to perform. And after that Ebola period, there's been other types of support to African countries that were dealing with some difficulties. So, for me, to be able to identify the continent's interest, to carry that interest all the way with a specific method, because having one idea, one common position is one thing. You need to carry that to the end. And
sur le continent africain.
So I've seen cases, especially those two on the continent, where we identified issues and divided solutions and carried them all the way, and that's how the continent wins. So let me say what my brother from Kenya, Martin Kimani, said earlier on the three African countries on the seat on the Security Council. With time, we realized that the three countries who are rotatively members of the Security Council, those countries are forging common positions. So today we have more or less Africa's voice through those three countries on the permanent, who will become permanent on the Security Council, and who more or less carry African positions. It wasn't always the case before. So, see the example of Libya that was recurrent today. The resolutions were voted, the good speeches, but when you sift beneath the surface, was Africa united at the Security Council? You see, when the resolution was voted about the no-fly zone, Africa was not there at the Security Council, the UN Security Council. So Africa's interest was, of course, clear, identified, but national positions, individual positions, overcame, or they weighed more than the common position. And once again, I was with Moussa Faki in Addis Ababa. There were fluctuations. Heads of states' positions would change, which made it easy for those who didn't want Africa to be at the table as solutions were being devised. So that aspect, having a common position, is of paramount importance. Of course, we can have partners, countries, even far from the continent, but who, well, I'm speaking from experience, who, there are countries who don't want to venture openly against African position when Africa decides to speak with one voice. So that capacity to adopt a common position for you is something of a priority. Because we keep saying that we to identify the defense of multilateralism. But when we talk about multilateral systems, well, now people think about the United Nations and the Bretton Woods institutions. Do you think it's the case? Is it an obsolete system by now? Because I don't want to say that, like those who say that an organization is in a state of cerebral death, but there are organizations who are unable to solve crises and to reform. But do you think we need to keep fighting to reinforce Africa's voice within those institutions, the UN and Bretton Woods institutions? Should we consider alternative solutions given the continent's interests? I'm thinking about the BRICS, that keeps gaining momentum. Well, more than half of the world's population, and about more than 1/3 of the world's GDP. 40% of internet users in the world are part of those BRICS. So that's what you've been saying. Can we also consider very different partners? Should we consider becoming member of different multilateral systems? Is that an option? Is that something worth considering by the African continent in terms of security? First of all, the multilateralism is not just the United Nations. It would be a mistake after so many years of UN existence to consider that multilateralism equals United Nations. I think that what we see today is that it's maybe the many components of the UN system beyond the fact of belonging in there as a country. Multilateralism today, of course, since many years we've been saying that multilateralism has been weakened, it needs to be reformed. What we see today is that people go around the system, they just do without it by many countries, because they can, some countries. So it has also to do with the fact that some don't feel that there is an answer to their problems or to their aspirations within those organizations, because there are many failures that were also mentioned this morning. But the multilateral system, based on the post-Second World War, had a clear objective. The idea was to seek peace between those who could wage war against each other. That was the objective. And when we moved to the Society of Nations from to the United Nations, the first objective was, it seemed complicated. They expanded, they started thinking differently. And today Africa finds herself within these multilateral systems. I'll tell you, when I was still Minister of Foreign Affairs, it was funny to me. We would say that African ministers, they would tell us that the international community will not allow you to do this, will not allow you to do that, as if Africa was not part of the international community. See, today, the blocs and the groups, the group of countries, just like BRICS, this is a reality of the world and the multilateral world. And it's within Africa's interest to have diverse partners. It's in our interests as Africa to shop in all corners of the world and to pursue our interests, both in New York, but also in Beijing, Abu Dhabi, Doha. So the interest of Africa today is, we've been talking about that this morning, is to choose for ourselves, to identify our partners for ourselves, for our defined interests, our own, the interests we've defined as Africans. So we see these blocks, and because they are forming just based on a specific subject or interest, but sometimes it's not a permanent group. That's the multilateral systems. So there are annual meetings in New York, the General Assembly, where you have many bilateral meetings, and other meetings on the sidelines, which was not the case many years ago. So when there's no head of state who doesn't provoke anything in the debate, the General Assembly is half empty. That's what you see in New York. So back when there was Castro, Gaddafi, Madame Kirchner, or President Trump during his first term, while the hall was full. Well, otherwise, the assemblies, the plenary becomes empty. People are leaving, going to side meetings because of other interests with a specific theme. But when and this shows that multilateral system it has changed, and we can't really worry about that, because it's also important to have a place where everybody feels at home, where it's okay to be and spend some time. But it's not enough even today. You know, in September in New York, there's always mini General Assemblies within the General Assembly, and that's the multilateral system today. The real question is not to preserve a certain format, but it's rather to adjust to reality, to the times we live in, and not to lose sight of our interests. That is a very dear word to me. And to use all means that we have, including the UN system, the multilateral system, but to not just be stuck to that system as if it was the only way to find a solution. BRICS, since their inception, these are countries that came together because they have a common interest. They have expanded, they still expand, but they did not come together as a bodies club. It was just because of a specific shared interest. And for the African continent, and of course, South Africa is on the continent, is part of the BRICS. We should take advantage of BRICS, the ASEAN, which brings together many Asian countries, take advantage of Francophonie, which is the second multilateral organization, the most important in terms of members. So it's this whole world that opens up right before us. So it's up to us to move forward with the current times and not be stuck to classic formats without following our own interests. I understand it's a difficulty for many people, so how to move from formats that have been ingrained in our brains and to embrace a new world and to build on different subjects with different partners. So, and that requires more mobility, agility, and for a young continent like Africa, it must be something that Africa can do very well. So it's absolutely fundamental. So there's that capacity to build a coalition. You've mentioned the Ebola case. It was the same thing during the COVID. The African Union was able to pull together very quickly. Donald Kaberuka was one of the architects of the coalition that played a key role. So it's all about security as well. And it was remarkable what was done. So the capacity is there. It's been demonstrated that it's possible. It's a very good example, Natalie. That African coalition that I call
qui, de leur propre
internationalist
initiative, se
African
sont mis ensemble
who took this initiative, came together,
ont décidé,
and decided,
en fait, de servir
you see,
de
to
passerelle, parfois
be
d'interprètes entre le
interpreters
continent africain et
between
le reste
the
du
African
monde,
continent
y
and the rest of the
compris
world,
les
including
institutions internationales,
international institutions,
particulièrement les institutions
particularly
de Bretton Woods.
Bretton Woods institutions.
Moi-même, j'ai fait partie de
I
cette
myself
équipe.
was
Et ceux d'entre
I'm a
nous
member of
qui
that
étaient,
team. So some of us who
n'étaient pas
were
nécessairement en fonction à la
not
tête de
necessarily
l'organisation,
heading any organization were able to join heads of states within the African Union to support African decisions taken together, supported, even though sometimes some things would not be moving as fast as others. But that's an example of how the multilateral world can operate today. I think we had weekly meetings every Thursday with Vera Songwe, who was our coordinator with the different agencies, finance ministers in African countries. They were able to come together and take advantage of other Africans' experience, just like Donald Kaberuka, Tidjane Thiam. There's even from the private sector, Ngozi, our Nigerian sister, at the World Trade Organization. This instinct of Africans who understand Africa and the rest of the world and international organizations was really, for me, a very revealing moment of what Africa can do spontaneously, given the knowledge that we have on our continent, and that maybe even more seriously when you are able to define and organize our private sector in Africa, which was very much involved. And when you look at the resolutions adopted on reducing the debt, I don't know where the 100 billion went, but I think we've seen 30, maybe 33, don't remember what happened. But on the African continent, Africans did the right thing. The seriousness of African heads of states during COVID, they took extremely complicated decisions like closing borders. We've seen this on television, how they were teaching people how to wash their hands, they were talking to the population. Africa woke up and took action. The leaders didn't get enough credit as they deserved, because they came out of their routine, the average tower, and suggested tangible solutions to their countries. So, Natalie, for me, multilateralism, if it's going to be reformed, I don't know. There will be a little of this here and there. There will be resolutions. We will come together. But today, it's inevitable that Africa, as she tries to diversify her partners and different forms of multilateralism with mini blocks, this is a tremendous opportunity for the African continent today.
Quelque chose d'autre. Est-ce que vous dites cette capacité à bâtir des coalitions multi-acteurs, y compris effectivement en associant le secteur privé, le secteur financier, les médias, la société civile. C'est vrai, dans le fond, c'est une espèce de multilatéralisme étendu en fonction des différents sujets. Est-ce que je peux peut-être vous poser une dernière question? Enfin, on a parlé de la difficulté à bâtir des positions communes et ensuite à les défendre en 54. Vous, Madame la secrétaire générale de la francophonie, vous êtes à la tête de 93 États qui sont répartis sur les 5 continents. Vous avez sûrement des conseils à donner sur à la fois la difficulté et les recettes, en quelque sorte, pour arriver à articuler, à définir ces positions communes et ensuite à les défendre.
Alors, c'est vrai que
pas facile.
Quand on est sur un seul continent, c'est déjà compliqué.
I think, organizing Africa and getting a common position is already hard enough because the Francophonie covers all continents,
Moi, j'ai été élue
all 5 continents, so that's a big job. You see, when I was elected,
une modernité pour s'adapter, puisque c'était les 50 ans de la francophonie en 2020. J'avais un petit peu participé aux réformes de l'Union africaine. Je savais la complexité et la difficulté de réformer une institution qui a ses habitudes, bonnes et mauvaises, depuis 50 ans.
ways of doing things that they are used to.
Avec son premier secrétaire général, Boutros
Boutros-Ghali, who was the first Secretary General
doté
of the Francophonie,
d'une influence politique qui permet aujourd'hui à ces États de temps en temps accepter de se mettre ensemble pour poursuivre un objectif commun. Je pense notamment, pour cela, mon expérience à moi à la tête de l'OIF, mais aussi dans ma vie professionnelle passée, c'est qu'il faut s'assurer que tous les membres d'une organisation comme la nôtre comptent, que les petits États comme les grands États, au-delà de la France et du Canada, qui a aussi Monaco, qui a la Suisse, qui a la Belgique, en Afrique, au-delà du Sénégal, qui est
but then you have Francophone, which Senegal, which is a founding member, then Central African Republic, and then small countries like that, Central African Republic, Burundi, and so on. All of them have to count, and they have to feel that they own the institution and they belong. They belong to it. So this feeling of belonging and enough space for everybody to express themselves without looking at size or wealth or others. For example, we have Canada. Canada is a member, but Quebec, the province of Quebec, is a member. It's a small member. Louisiana in the U.S. is a member, but you also have Southeast Asia and so on, Laos, Cambodia, and so on. And then you have Libya. In Africa.
C'est un conseil que je sais qui marche. Certains des conseils que je donne ne marchent pas. Mais
what really works is to make everybody feel that they belong, that they are invested, and that they are neither small or unimportant.
Un petit pays comme les Comores, ça vaut la peine parce que c'est une diversité de l'Afrique qu'il ne faut pas négliger.
But it has its contribution because it has a specific contribution to the whole.
On a ce sens d'appartenance.
So this is what the advice I should give. I think everybody have to feel that they belong. Nobody should be neglected. Nobody should be brushed aside because I don't know they are poor or they are small or unimportant. Nobody is unimportant.
De ce code numérique mondial, voulu que le monde francophone ne soit pas perdu avec ce code qui est extrêmement important. On parlait de l'importance de l'intelligence artificielle. Eh bien, nous avons des pays membres qui, en dehors de leurs frontières, ne savent s'exprimer qu'en français. C'est le cas notamment de plusieurs de nos États du Sahel et de l'Afrique centrale, qui restent très liés à la langue française pour pouvoir communiquer dans le monde. Et donc, nous avons pensé qu'il était important que tout ce monde qui s'exprime en français, une grande partie sur le continent africain, puisse bénéficier, puisse faire partie
should
de la réflexion sur ce code qui
take
va
part
s'appliquer à
in
tout le
this
monde,
discussion.
de
AI,
donner ses propres suggestions,
the
propositions,
AI, the whole AI
et
field.
qu'une fois que ce code
the
sort, il
code
puisse
and
aussi
so on.
sortir en langue française, la langue dans laquelle
So that
plusieurs
the
de nos
code is
États
also
s'expriment.
made
Nous,
available
l'OIF,
in
nous avons mobilisé
French.
tous nos États membres.
So the
Nous
francophonie
avons ensuite, en tant que secrétariat, proposé quelques pistes pour
mobilize ourselves
ce
really
code
behind this
numérique
because
mondial.
we
Nous
have to
avons
have French
ce
in
qu'on
this
appelle des
system.
groupes d'ambassadeurs francophones
You
un peu
have
partout dans le
also
monde qui ont
francophone
été
ambassadors
mobilisés pour que la
groups that you
contribution
find
du
all
monde
over the world.
francophone à
So
ce
these
code existe, et
francophone
nous, donc, nous, le
ambassadors
secrétariat, nous l'avons aussi
representing
traduit
francophone
en
countries,
français
of
pour
course.
qu'ils puissent être
They
accessibles.
have to be more active in these regions, and their work should be recognized because we want all these things to be translated into French.
Personnes ou personnalités qui avaient été
Because
sélectionnées par le secrétaire général des
you
Nations
know,
Unies
the
comme
UN Secretary General had selected an ambassador
il y avait une seule
for
personne sur 10 qui
AI
venait d'un pays membre
or
de
digital.
l'OIF.
I
Ce
think
pays,
they
c'était
called
le
him digital
Rwanda.
ambassador, and
Mais c'était une jeune Rwandaise
it was
anglophone.
a young Rwandan,
donc,
but she was an
Heureusement
anglophone.
que
She spoke
beaucoup de
English.
pays, contrairement au Rwanda, qui a
Rwanda
à la fois l'anglais, le français, d'autres langues,
is trilingual,
de nos
French,
États membres
English,
n'étaient
and
pas
Rwanda.
capables de vraiment fonctionner
But you
avec un code,
don't
n'étaient
find
pas
a
capables
lot
de
of
contribuer et après
countries
de pouvoir bénéficier
that
d'un code
would
qui
work
était dans une langue
properly
qu'ils ne comprenaient
in
pas.
only
Donc,
English,
voilà
because they don't understand English.
l'ouverture de
So
l'espace pour
this
que tout le
is
monde
very
appartienne,
important
très important. Il n'y a
to
pas
make
de
sure that
petits
everybody
pays, de
feel
grands pays.
belonged.
Ensuite,
That they belong, you know,
pouvoir
like
trouver une
francophones
contribution
or more less important. That's out.
qui est
You
le
have
souci,
to
qui
have,
est la volonté,
you know, the other languages as well. Then also the size and wealth. Thank you. Any, I don't know, moderator, maybe we should have questions from the room.
On peut prendre une ou deux questions si ça vous dérange pas.
Très bien.
I think we can have two questions. Microphones, please. Somebody.
Excellence.
Your Excellency.
Merci. C'est plutôt
Thank you.
un commentaire plus qu'une question. Je crois que la capacité de négociation de l'Afrique,
Africa's negotiation capacity or capacity to formulate common positions
des sujets
is absolutely key.
comment faire en sorte que les
That's really the key. But it's not easy to ensure that the 51 or so countries speak with one voice and have a common position. But it can be done. It can be done. But it has to be done already from the angle of each country. But there are also external pressures that have an interest in us not getting together. And also such and such a country not having internally a common position. That is a fact. Take climate. You remember we had an extraordinary summit in Africa, in Nairobi, and Africa had one voice. We had a common position. But, of course, there are promises and, green fund and what have you. These are words. It's a pity Mr. Kaberuka is not here. Mr. Kaberuka is working on the funding of the peacekeeping operations in Africa. He fought very hard along with our help, and we had resolution 2519, so that now we have 75% of the peace budget, the peacekeeping budget that goes to Africa, 75%. But when we wanted to actually apply this resolution to Somalia, well, Donald, I'm sure you were in that delegation, the delegation that went to New York and then Washington. We failed. We failed. So we had one common position. And in addition to that, a lot of other parts of the world support that. But unfortunately, one country in this, one permanent member of the Security Council can block everything. And this is what happened. So we have 12,000 men who should go there and who should face Al-Shabaab. But we can't do anything because we can't have that money. Because everybody agreed, and at the UN it's the same. Everybody agrees, same voice, one voice, but the Security Council, which is a competent institution in that case, is done in such a way that one state, just one permanent member, can block everything because they have veto powers. So this is a problem. It's a problem. Now, it's true that African countries are not always well organized, but we have already reorganized the A3, the three-member, non-permanent members of the Security Council. I think that's accepted. That's accepted. We have direct relations with the Commission, with the, we at least in general, and they keep together, the three of them. But that's not enough. That's not enough. There are limits. Our whatever we try is always limited by these factors. But I still think that the primary responsibility is ours. I repeat it every day. Sometimes I'm politically incorrect, and some of the African leaders also find me a bit too much sometimes. But I can't stop because we are threatened with extremism, terrorism, and it is not threatening Africa only. An African country like Somalia, we've already spent 3 billion. 3 billion euros have been spent, but the situation is not moving very far. Because there is that one country that won't allow it. Actually, they didn't even need to oppose the veto. They just threatened to veto the decision, and of course everybody chickened out. Thank you.
Dans ce cas, la
Thank
meilleure
you very
chose pour le
much.
continent, c'est d'arrêter les conflits.
Solution is
Je
not
pense que
to fight,
c'est la meilleure assurance
to
parce que
avoid, to prevent conflict,
tous les conflits
because
qu'il y a sur le
resolving
continent,
them has become a
et les
headache.
frustrations qu'il y a par
Everybody is
rapport au
frustrated
Conseil de sécurité,
about the functioning of the Security
un seul
Council,
pays sur
where
reste de la
one
planète
single
peut
country
décider.
can
pense que
muzzle
ce qui est en notre
the entire
pouvoir, c'est de
globe.
commencer
Muzzle
à
the
entamer
entire
des
globe.
conflits et quand
So,
ils arrivent,
so
il
maybe
faut
we
qu'on
should
puisse les
focus
arrêter,
more
qu'on
on
puisse
prevention
réunir
of
nos
conflicts.
forces pour
I think
combattre
we
le
should get
terrorisme
together
qui est
to fight terrorism. Let's get together on
qui
our
nous
own.
affecte tous et
Because
qui est très
terrorism
complexe.
is threatening
Je pense qu'il y a
all of us
beaucoup de
in every
conflits sur le
country.
continent africain qui
And there
n'ont
are too many
aucune raison d'être.
conflicts that do not have any need to exist. They can be prevented. Thank you.
On peut prendre le dernier commentaire.
Last comment. Thank you.
Your Excellency, Louise, thank you for a very explicative fireside chat. I have a comment, and I want to say, my name is Kingsley Morgado, and I'm president of the African School of Governance, the ASG University, headquartered here in Kigali. In our conversations about changing Africa's bargaining power or repositioning Africa's bargaining power, I find that there's something very fundamental to which we do not pay enough attention. With all due respect to multilateralism, multilateralism will not save Africa. Multilateralism will not make Africa influential. What will make Africa influential is Africa's ability to govern its domestic national spaces and to create prosperity and to defend the territories of African countries. So we're talking about governance in our countries. If we don't sort that out, we're not going to be able to get the kind of respect on the international stage that we hanker after with multilateral forums. I'll give you an example. I spent 17 years as a United Nations official, went from entry level to director before I left in 2008. South Korea joined the UN only in 1990 or so, very late. By 1997, they had produced the Secretary General because they were aligned with a superpower that backed their candidate. But they had created wealth. They were an economic power in the world. So my point is this, not to diminish the importance of multilateralism, but that Africa must first govern itself at home effectively. You know, multilateral forums are a projection of national power, but we sometimes tend to think that they matter in and of themselves. My view is that they don't. They're only as good as you are from home, and then you're projecting outwardly abroad. Because the nature of the world is just very simple. The world has gone in epochs. Once upon a time, we had an international system where countries dealt with traditional diplomacy, wars, commerce. Then, starting from the late 1800s, once you had the Universal Postal Union and globalization became real, you began to have what we call the International Society of States, because now you have multilateral forums. And then the third phase is the so-called international community, which, of course, is an aspirational phrase, and it's not real. So African countries must understand the real nature of the world before they can engage with the world with stronger bargaining power. Thank you.
I can't. I cannot not comment on your comment, Kinsley. Don't you think it's also important for I think we Africans tend to be shy in the international arena, and perhaps we've been taught to be very polite and to behave, but I find that there's no question about really governing ourselves and making sure we have something desirable like South Korea did. But there's also something about not negotiating our worth. Africans are good at not knowing, or at least not negotiating, their worth. I mean, if you look at a small country like Djibouti. Djibouti is a tiny country right at the very end of the Horn of Africa, basically produces nothing much, but it's been able to bargain its worth, and its worth is geographical location. That's all Djibouti has. And the rest of the world is in Djibouti. China is there, US is there, France has been there for a long time. Who else is there? Japan, the rest of the world, all these countries have their bases there, they're checking on their maritime transport from there. How much does Djibouti have? But Djibouti was able to say, because I'm located in this particular part of Africa, I matter. And it's been able to survive just with geographical location. We have, I was talking to my friends from Europe. We've been active in the Africa-Europe Foundation, Natalie and some other people, and we were talking about the upcoming ministerial meeting. I think it's in 2 days in Brussels, between the European Union and the African Union. And I was saying, I am praying that I'm wrong, but I would not be surprised in 2 days in Brussels if the number of African ministers is not at least double the number of ministers from the EU. I will count in 2 days. I think it's on the 21st. Why should that be like that? Why is the worth? Why do we think that we're not worth whatever we have as value? Can we value that value more than we have been doing? Why should we send full-fledged, important plenipotentiaries to sit with directors from whatever part of the world? So that's also a problem for the continent. That, you know, if you are a government minister, you should be having a dialogue with the government minister. You should make your point of view clear. You should not be talking to a deputy director, which happens a lot in the relations between Africa and the rest of the world. So I think, definitely, no question about it, governing ourselves to be desirable, to offer something, to be worth if not the friendship, the partnership of other parts of the world. And perhaps if we complained a bit more about what they do to us and put a bit more effort into what we can do, that might be a good way to go.
Mesdames et messieurs, nous arrivons au terme de ce panel riche et inspirant. Le message est clair. Notre part est la plus grande affaire pour avoir un siège à la table.
I think now we should conclude on
C'est
this.
notre responsabilité, comme nous l'avons entendu.
And
Le deuxième point
we
est
have a
que
responsibility to respect ourselves and
compris que
make sure
quand
we
on
have
est unis jusqu'au
weight
bout, on peut accomplir énormément.
on
Comme vous
the
l'avez bien
international
dit.
scene, as
Et cela,
Minister
indépendamment de la crise,
Brigitte
de la
said.
situation, du système ou de l'endroit.
We have to
Mesdames et messieurs, nous avons
respect our position, know where to go and where not to go. Please not to send ministers,
dans
as she
nos
said.
institutions, dans nos
Okay,
décisions que nous prenons tous
so
les
I
jours,
think
et notre
this is
vision
what we should
partagée
be
d'une Afrique
doing.
forte qui
We want
propose
an
et qui
Africa that
transforme
is
dans
strong,
ce siècle et dans ceux à venir.
that is
Merci de votre
proactive,
attention.
and that is
Nous
in
allons
charge of
maintenant
its
passer au
future.
dernier
Thank you very
panel pour
much.
la
So now we're going to have the
It's
last
going
panel
to be about the private
of the
military
day.
companies,
I think
and it's going
it's
to
about
be held here in
private
the next
military
15
companies
minutes.
in
Thank you
15
very
minutes.
much for your kind attention.
I won't say all of them. Okay. I just thought I should pick one or two and then mention as I invite. I won't. That's right. Okay. It will look like we are favoring others. So, hello, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Could we please take our seats? Could we please take our seats so that we can start the afternoon, our final panel of the day, actually.